Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm your host, Nick Palavita, and today we're going to be discussing the Ukraine with people that are from the Ukraine as opposed to Americans who don't know anything about Ukraine. So, first of all, we're going to bring in the person who's the host of the show, Ukraine, China, Russia, China, and Ukraine. Let's bring in Sasha Starr. Sasha, welcome to the show. He's in Canada
Thank you, Nick.
now.
Thank you,
In
Nick.
Canada now, so he's safe. So no problem there. Thank you, Sasha, for coming.
Um,
Yeah,
I don't think that I have very good news for you today, and I'll
you
tell you
know.
why.
Oh, really?
Last 2 days, I would say,
Yeah.
I spent analyzing all the last movements and talks between Ukraine, Russia, U.S., European nations, or so on. Let me start with trip to Moscow of Burns, if you know his. Basically, his Biden's right hand in all the political questions, especially concerning Russia. And he speaks Russian, and he spent some time in Moscow as I believe he was actually ambassador of the United States at one point, and he knows the subject really, really well. We've heard all about that trip, but we are not been told about any results of that trip and what was achieved, what was accomplished. However, obviously there was a trip, they talked about something. So after that, there were talk about the Russian forces encircling Ukraine and the attack is imminent. And Biden was saying that it was in the next 3 days or maybe 2 days or in 5 days. But it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. At the same time, he was 15 times a day. He was referring to the point that no US, no NATO forces will ever fight on Ukrainian soil. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So, what it tells me is that he was, while not providing almost any help to Ukraine to speak of at that time, he was essentially encouraging Putin that, okay, you can go in, we are going to stay and just don't touch NATO territory, but you can go into Ukraine and do whatever you need to do. So it seems to me that there is a picture of if any negotiations between Burns and Putin, there was an understanding that Ukraine will be a territory that Putin can take as much as he wants or needs. However, they would extract from him some cooperation of Russia in things like Iran, maybe if some other, maybe North Korea, maybe some other areas where US needs Russian help. However, that plan, it seems to me, failed because of the heroism of Ukrainian fighters and personally Mr. Zelensky. So once that started to happen, and neither Biden, neither European leaders, or even Putin, nobody expected that. But when that happened de facto, now they had to completely revamp their policy toward Ukraine and agree to provide some additional ammunition and financial help and all kinds of help. But it's too little, too late. And it seems to me that US is not really doing its job, even with this financial help. Okay, the latest help was $750 million. You know how much gave a little Luxembourg, who has a couple of million people and very little territory? They made a payment of $1 billion. So if you will try to divide it by per capita, you will see that the help of US is laughable. Now they failed to establish not no-fly zone. That's how they could dare. The Putin against Putin do no-fly zone. You can call him a butcher, you can call him murderer, so on, but you cannot establish no-fly zone. Okay, establish at least humanitarian corridor so people, wounded people, kids, they could safely leave their places and go to Poland or some other countries. They failed to do that. So it seems to me Biden is playing some kind of a game which was prearranged with Putin. And Biden say, "Oh, you're a butcher, you're a killer." So Putin will say, "You're an idiot and you're a sleepy Joe." Okay, but this is all spectacle. It's a theater. I don't buy that.
Okay, we're going to bring in some other people right now from around the world. Let's bring in Ben Banerjee, who's the president of the Swiss Impact Investment Association. Shaquille Latimer, who's a hedge fund manager down in Australia. And of course, our special guest today is Ivan Kurachenko, who is out of Kyiv in the Ukraine. So, Ivan, I'm just going to start with you. What is the situation down there right now in Kyiv?
Good morning, America. Good evening, Europe, and good, good sometime other parts of the world. So the situation here is really tough. There were a couple of calm days in the area I'm currently in. It's near Kyiv, but a couple of days ago started some artillery fighting. There were rockets which were destroyed in the air by Ukrainian anti-air forces. So it's quite loud here. Fortunately, no Russian tanks and no Russian soldiers on the horizon. But anyway, it's not so so calm and so safety in the Kyiv suburbs as everyone in Ukraine wanted to be. Yeah.
Okay, and also you have a presentation you want to show us, Ivan? Do you want me to bring that? Let's bring it up before we get to our panel.
Actually, today I wanted to talk about the world support of Ukraine, and probably get some funds for that support, which we are currently doing for colleagues who joined the armed forces of Ukraine. Sasha told that the resistance of Ukrainians, it was actually a very big surprise, not only for the Russians, for the Putin, but for the rest of the world. And I don't know what was the plan. But what we can see here about the help of the world to the Ukrainian soldiers. That at least United States expected that Russians will take some part of the Ukraine very quickly, and they provided Ukrainians with the javelins, with the stingers, with some troop weapons, not heavy weapons, which can be used for some guerrilla fighting. But luckily, we've kept all the major cities. We've kept 90% of the Ukrainian territory, and for now we require that help, that heavy armament, which wasn't initially in the plan of the United States. In order to get not to defend ourselves, because our warriors, they're keeping their positions pretty well in most of the Ukrainian places, except of maybe some east of Ukraine in Mariupol. But we need weapons to claim our territories back, to fight Russian soldiers. And first of all, I wanted to say and to tell everyone big Ukrainian thanks, because the success of Ukraine, it's first of all not only about the heroism of the Ukrainian people, of the Ukrainian warriors, but also about the help of the world. We were discussing the help of the countries, but also what I can see is the help of the regular people all over the world. Yeah. During the first days after the invasion, National Bank of Ukraine opened a special bank account for the Ukrainian armed forces, where everyone could transfer money, and they during that month they gathered about $500 million of United States dollars from the regular people, from the companies which they already transferred to the armed forces of Ukraine. One of the biggest volunteers fund which supports the Ukrainian army come back alive. They've gathered around $100 million also from the regular people, which allowed them to buy equipment, to some protection, some armor, some vehicles for more than 100 military units that they are supporting. So it's first of all thanks to regular people, yeah. And I've got some video which Ukrainian
США
Слава Україна!
до Ради Європи. За місяць війни до нашої боротьби долучилися найвпливовіші організації, компанії та люди світу. Леонардо Ді Капріо, Міла Куніс, Ілон Маск, Девід Бекхем.
Я передаю свій інстаграм-аккаунт Харківському перинатальному центру.
І тепер ніхто і ніколи не сплутає нас із сусідами.
Ukraine.
І не спитає, де ця Україна. Весь світ з Україною.
So thanks again. Actually, on that website, World for Ukraine.net, you can see the world support for Ukraine in every country around the world, and also there you can find all links to the official volunteer organizations which are supporting armed forces, some humanitarian help, etc. It's on the official information and the official funds. If you can help Ukraine with more than $100 or $1,000, yeah. If you don't have millions of dollars or hundreds thousands of dollars to help Ukrainians, yeah, you can also help a little to my colleagues because I'm gathering some help for them via my PayPal account, or you can use some Swift transfer. So Nick, can you please show that information so anyone can see how you can transfer any sum? Yeah, we've already raised 1/3 of the required sum and like a couple thousands of dollars in order to buy a drone and some protective equipment to my colleagues. I've got 5 colleagues from my company who joined the armed forces of Ukraine, so we want to help them a little bit. So we'll appreciate any help. And thanks for the support.
I'd like to bring in Ben Banerjee now, who's the president of the Swiss Impact Investment Association, which is kind of interesting because originally Swiss Impact is for climate control and social good. But Ben, I wonder, this wasn't on our radar screen, but what are your thoughts about this? This is a different form of impact investing. So what are your thoughts on that?
It is. I just listened to Sasha and also to Ivan. Ivan, if you can share your details with us, that would be really helpful, because we are looking for organizations to support in Ukraine, and you have completely full our support. I don't know if you're aware, and what you said, Ivan, is very true, that the support from public is much more than the support from the government. For example, the German government is more worried about having recession or a few thousand people without jobs, so they will not support Ukraine. But when the place in Germany was advertised that they are looking for places for Ukrainian refugees, within 2 hours, 170,000 German families opened their houses for Ukrainians. I mean, we also have opened our houses. We have also put our house on the list for Ukrainians to come and live with us. So the support you're getting from the public in Europe, I think, is far higher than the government. And I just wanted to go back to the question of the whole program where you say, can Ukraine defeat Russia? And because I was also involved in the whole discussion with Ukraine since 2004. So I have been involved in negotiations and all that with Russia due to my place also in the East-West Institute. The issue is that the answer to that question is not likely, because if the West does not support lethal arms or does not pump up its weapon delivery to Ukraine, and the governments do not get their act in order, Ukraine will lose, because the resources Russia have is far higher. Their resources, their weapon quality, their quantity of weapon, and the indiscriminate attack and destruction will go on, and it will, as the time goes on, it will just get worse, because if Putin does not achieve what he is trying to achieve, he will make it worse, even going as far as the weapons of mass destruction like nuclear or biological weapons. And that's what worries me, because he will use it. Nothing is going to stop him. So we need to, as all Western leaders, everybody, we need to support Ukraine with everything, because what Ivan said and what Sasha said earlier also is very true. If Ukraine falls, it is the best thing we can do for the anti-Western bloc, because the next thing that's going to create is the bloc of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and these kind of countries. They're all watching how the West and NATO is acting at this moment. And this keeping on repeating the same thing, that NATO will not act outside the borders of NATO, NATO will not, it's such a big bullshit, because after Ukraine, Russia will go for Moldova, and then who is going to stop Russia from going to Finland and Sweden and all this? So we have to make a step.
And Poland and Lithuania, Estonia, all those other former USSR countries.
No, but not Poland. Poland is NATO. I'm talking about non-NATO nations.
Okay, so Poland is NATO. They decide that they're going to give their airships to Ukraine and has it vetoed by the President of the United States. Now, if Poland is part of NATO, why isn't the United States and the UK and France and the other powerhouse countries like Germany loading up Poland with as much weaponry as they possibly can? And if Poland chooses
Poland
to give
is
it
a
to
NATO. Poland is a NATO nation.
Yes, I know Poland is a NATO country, but they only have limited resources themselves. So they should be loading up that country to allow Poland to give weapons to other Eastern Bloc countries.
In Ukraine, we have very nice joke regarding the NATO and their reaction toward the Russian aggression. I think it's very suitable for the discussion. If Russia will attack one country of the NATO, NATO will gather and discuss how to exclude that country from the NATO in order not to confront Russia. So that actually what currently we are joking about in Ukraine, and actually jokes is one of the way how we handle all this madness which happens here.
And I completely agree to that, Ivan, what you are saying, because this is a joke. I know it won't happen, but it is still a joke. It can happen if Trump becomes the president. Then it can happen, because he will destroy NATO.
Ben,
but
come on.
Otherwise, it won't happen.
That is so unfair. Look, if you don't like Trump, you don't like Trump.
Trump has been weakening the NATO from the day
Why
one.
does everything have to come back to Trump? You say that Trump weakened NATO. He goes into Germany and says to Germany, you guys are buying billions of dollars worth of oil and natural gas off Russia, and yet you expect the taxpayers of the United States to defend you against Russia. You need to stop your dependence on them, and they didn't do it.
I agree.
He also asked the major countries and the major economies who, after World War II, were not able to fully fund NATO, to increase the amount that they were spending on NATO so that the US wasn't the main contributor of funds to NATO. And because that didn't go down very well with European politicians, now all of a sudden he's being labelled as somebody who weakened NATO. He was not trying to do that. Let's not blame everything on Trump. But
I'm not blaming everything on him. I'm just saying at this moment with Biden, we are much stronger because he has brought the whole world together. Today we have Japan, we have Europe, we have everybody on the same planned working, trying to do something for Ukraine. Do you
Are you
think this would have
suggesting-
happened?
are you suggesting that
Countries
under
he
Trump,
brought together. He brought leaders of all these countries together. But I want to mention two,
are you suggesting
in my
under
opinion,
Trump,
important
the leaders
points.
would have come together?
I would like to mention two important points. Let's come back from it all what's happening right now and start some reasonable discussion to understand actually who is who and what is what. Is Russia an independent country? Probably yes. Okay, except that it's owned by Putin and his friends, but let's consider it an independent country, okay? Is Ukraine an independent country? Yes, it is since 1991. It's independent country. So if Ukraine wants to align with NATO and European Union, how anybody in the world could justify the murderer and butcher going in and say, no, 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 you are not independent country. You are nothing. You are just little thing with you other Soviet leaders or so on. Why in the world nobody objected to this obscenity and say, Mr. Putin, you are wrong. It is an independent country. If 5 days before Russian invasion, if NATO would put their forces on Ukrainian soil, on Ukrainian request, for example, we are there on Ukrainian request as an independent country. They ask us to put our military there, and they do it. Do you think Putin would go and attack Ukraine? Never. Never. This coward would never attack Ukraine if there would be even intention to put their forces. But when Biden is saying, no, 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 Ukrainian, NATO forces will be ever fighting for Ukraine, no American forces will fight for Ukraine. Now, the second thing is, if goal of NATO is to protect the Europe, particularly Western Europe, from Soviet attack and later on Russian attack, okay? Then what's the logic behind bringing in Estonia with a population of 1.2 or maybe 3 million people and reject Ukraine with 44 million people, and then when they already both US and England forfeited on their pledge, according to Budapest Memorandum, to protect territorial Ukraine. So this is, I see hypocrisy on the NATO part, and US, I'm sorry to say, as well. Maybe it's not the right time to criticize US, but you know what's happening right now? They're preparing peace negotiations tomorrow in Turkey, and Russia grabs whatever territory in the last few hours, what's left until these negotiations. They're trying to grab the Mariupol's already done that. They're now bombing Kyiv, and maybe they will be lucky to get Kyiv. So then the dream of Putin to grab all the eastern Ukraine, that's what's going to be discussed tomorrow in Turkey. Where is NATO? Where is US? Nowhere. Thank you.
You're absolutely right, Sasha. You're absolutely right. That Russia, if we just accept that this is the reason why Putin went in, that he wants to make sure that Ukraine doesn't join NATO and doesn't join Europe, what right does he have to impose his views on another sovereign country? He doesn't have the right to do that. It's a breach.
No Western leader stopped him
NATO,
right there. Nobody.
That's exactly right. NATO has done nothing about it. Western leaders have done nothing about it, and it's our weakness that has allowed this to happen to the people of Ukraine. It's completely unacceptable. I agree with you.
I'm sorry to say, in my view, NATO is a bunch of bureaucrats who are holding on to their jobs and their leased cars and probably free tickets to fly anywhere in Europe, and that's all they good for. And it's, in one thing I would agree with Trump, is to ban absolutely out this stupid organization, and in its place create a new real war organization, war machine, which would be definitely England number one, Poland number two, Germany, France, and maybe even without US.
Okay, we've been joined by the Honorable
strategists instead of politicians. Maybe that would help.
We have the Honorable David M. Walker, who's a former Comptroller General of the United States. He may be able to weigh in on this. NATO, and this it seems to me, David, this is an economic war as well as a military war. Follow the money. What are your thoughts about NATO, David?
Well, let me go back to what I said at the outset about what I thought Putin's motivations were, and where I think we are now, and where I think we're headed. Clearly, as has been said, Putin does not want Ukraine to join NATO. Putin does not want Ukraine to join the European Union. And in addition to that, it's pretty clear that Putin would like to put back together portions of the old Soviet Union, and in particular recognizes the mineral, agricultural, and other value of Ukraine, which is significant. And so my view was, when he went in, arguably his objective was to take portions of the East and exit, including creating a land bridge to Crimea, to overthrow the government in the West, but not to try to take the entire country, to basically let the West have a new leader that was more friendly to Moscow, and have the western portion of Ukraine be in effect a buffer to NATO. I also said at the beginning that I thought there was zero chance that that Putin wants to attack a NATO country. And I think that's clearly the case now, because his military has performed dismally. And the last thing that he needs to do is to have a direct military conflict with NATO. But now you have to see where we are now. Clearly, he's not been able to achieve the overthrow of the government, nor do I think he will be able to. He's not going to be able to occupy as much of the country as he would have liked to have occupied. And I think that where we're headed for now, if there is a negotiated settlement, then I think it's going to involve around some of the territory that he's already occupied. But I think it's just as likely there may not be a negotiated settlement, and there be some type of an armistice like we have on the Korean continent, where Russia maintains some of the land that it's already taken. Ukraine does not agree to cede the land, but there's a ceasefire and, in effect, a stalemate. I think we need to be thinking about a different kind of sanctions than just economic sanctions, because economic sanctions don't just punish Putin and the oligarchs and the people that are in power in Russia. They punish innocent Russian people as well. And they have not been as effective as people advertise that they would be. And China is obviously a backdoor release valve, along with others, for Russia. What I think we need to be thinking about is modernizing the United Nations to where it can actually be more effective with regard to promoting peace and security in the world. And in that regard, I think the most likely scenario that would be feasible would be to expand the Security Council from 15 members to 18 members. Secondly, expand the permanent members of the Security Council from 5 to 8 by adding Russia, by adding Japan, Germany, and India, and by eliminating the veto of the Security Council, where no nation, including the United States, would be able to veto an action by the proposed action by the UN, and where it would take a majority vote of the permanent members of the Security Council, as well as a majority vote of the entire Security Council, to move forward. Now, candidly, I'd prefer to kick Russia off as a permanent member of the Security Council. The problem is the way the UN Charter is written. Every member of every permanent Security Council member has a veto, and therefore Russia by itself could say, no, you can't do that. Although I think the alternative that I just suggested could create enough global political support to expand it, to eliminate the veto, and you could get the 2/3 support necessary. That would be a permanent diminution of Russia's diplomatic influence in the world, and it would be a significant strengthening of the ability of the UN to actually do something. Because right now, if there's anything that it proposes to do that directly or indirectly affects one of the members of the Security Council, it's going to do nothing. because that proposed action will be vetoed. And I'll leave it at that.
David, what would you think about the technicality to make the right decisions? The technicality is that Soviet Union, Belarus, and Ukraine, there were three, prior to 1991, there were three members of the United Nations. Now, while Ukraine became independent and remained a member, so is Belarus. With Soviet Union, it's a different story. It ceased to exist. However, Russia formally was never accepted as a member of United Nations. It could be, but it didn't. So right now, technically speaking, de facto, yes, obviously they are a member, but technically speaking, they are not. Even when former Yugoslavia went apart and there were so many different nations like Serbia and Macedonia and Croatia and so on, they all went through the due process to become members of the United Nations. All of them. And they became members. Russia never did. What's in your view that meaning of that?
Well, my view, Russia should be a member of the United Nations. I would like to kick them off. I would like to kick them off as a permanent member of the Security Council. And unfortunately, I think, Sasha, the Soviet Union fell apart many years ago, 20 years ago, basically.
Sure.
Okay.
Certainly.
And yet the UN has treated the Russian Federation as the successor to the Soviet Union. Right.
So United Nations was wrong by doing that. All they should have done go through the due process. They they broke their own rules, and they didn't fix that by now, and nobody is even bringing that up.
Sasha, I agree with you. They should have done it differently. I agree with you. But we are where we are. So I think what we have to say is, what's a practical approach from this point going forward, given the fact that they've done nothing for 20 years?
Yes.
I don't know how
I'll tell you what to do. The organization which is not following their own rules for 20 years has to be disbanded. Out. That's no such an organization, and nobody needs this organization anymore, because today there is a rule of a strong man. Whoever is strong can do anything. No United Nations, no NATO, nobody can stop the strong man. So Putin does he care today about United Nations or anything? No, they're just going in and doing. So who needs United Nations? United States have that beautiful building and hosting them out, and just develop it into condominiums and get billions of dollars.
Well, no one can stop the strongman. Let's talk to Ivan, since he is in Kyiv, Ukraine. Are you guys able to stop the strongman, Ivan?
Yeah, we are currently stopping them. Yeah, luckily Russia didn't manage to succeed their plans, and now they're changing their plans. Yeah, they recently announced that the only plan they had officially by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Yeah.
Ivan, do you really believe what they're saying?
No. I'm not. I don't believe any word Russia is saying, and I hope that any sane person in the world doesn't believe any Russians. And they've told that about the majority of innocent population of Russia. Actually, we've discussed that on our previous meeting, that majority of Russian population supports the war in Ukraine. Majority of Russian population supports the further invasion to Europe. So there are no innocent Russians. Yeah, and I totally agree with the Dave that not only about the economic sanctions to Russians, yeah, but about personal sanctions to Russians, but about the organizational sanctions to Russians, because we see a lot of organizations worldwide, not only United Nations, yeah, we've got other organizations where Russians are members of their boards. Russians, they managing those organizations, or Russians are paying bribes to these organizations in order to support their current policy. For instance, the situation with Red Cross, which can't, Red Cross, it's a World Health Organization actually, yeah? And it can't organize the humanitarian corridors to evacuate Ukrainian people to the European countries, but they are going to Putin, to Lavrov, to negotiations, head of Red Cross, and they're going to establish a base in Rostov Oblast in Russia for the money which people are paying to Red Cross, and in order to help Russians kidnap people from Mariupol, from other Ukrainians territories, and transfer them to Russia, whether they have an opportunity to evacuate them to the Ukrainian territory or to European territory. We are talking about such huge and powerful organization as Red Cross. So I ask everyone not to donate Red Cross anymore till they will rethink their business doing with Russia and whom they are supporting during this war. And as for the United Nations, I recently discovered one interesting thing, why Russia doesn't name their wars, because their invasion to Ukraine is not the first Russian war. Yeah, they had previously invasion to Moldova. They had previously invasion to Georgia. They had invasion to Ukraine in 2014 to Donbass and the annexation of Crimea, but they didn't name all those invasions war. They always named these invasions special military operation. The reason is very simple, that the member of the United Nations, member of the Security Council of the United Nations can't participate in wars, and it can organize wars. It can attack. So they named that these actions special military operations in order not to go against the UN Charter actually. So every media, every person which is talking about this war as some special military operation or some conflict in Ukraine, because there is no conflict in Ukraine, there is war in Ukraine, Russian-Ukrainian war. And every person which is talking, which is believing all those narratives of the Russian propaganda, they actually help Russians to tell this special military operation, and not to tell that they have war in Ukraine. Yeah,
well, that's interesting, because the U.S. is kind of the opposite. Okay, under our Constitution, only the Congress can declare a war. The president cannot declare a war. We've not declared war since World War II, even though we fought in Korea, we fought in Vietnam, we fought the first quote unquote Gulf War, we fought the quote unquote Iraq War, we fought the quote unquote Afghanistan War. So we're kind of like the opposite. We like to call things wars, even though they may be quote unquote special military operations.
Well, I want to thank, I want to just thank everyone. I'm Steve Rao. I serve as one of our analysts, and I always come to listen to David Walker because he's just such a great analyst. And I just want to tell you that we pray for you, all of us. In North Carolina, we have 21,000 Ukrainians. And I actually just wrote an op-ed on one of our news publications here about a graduate student named Misha Sivits, who's actually from Dnipro, which is a city in Ukraine, I think, that's focused on Russian technology. And it was quite emotional listening to him talk about how he's hearing the bombs go off as he's trying to even know whether his parents and siblings are alive. And so if you could put that in the chat, I'm going to send whatever organization you're talking about to do that. And I'll just end with this, for the panel to give insight is, my biggest concern is, first of all, I think it's important to realize that really, I don't know whether NATO was the issue driving this, because they're a consensus organization. And so even if one country said no, Ukraine wouldn't be given access to NATO. And even in countries like Hungary, I think we already know, my biggest concern is that, and I guess I'll ask David what his opinion is, but do you believe it's in the best interest of Ukraine that the war drags on, or do you believe it's too early to assume that Russia cannot win? Because my biggest fear is that this really, you talked about World War II, but this sort of really violates or will disrupt the world order in the future. If Putin is successful, what's going to stop Taiwan from being invaded by China? What's going to invade other independent nations to be invaded? I mean, in 1991, President George H.W. Bush brought the world together and said you couldn't invade a sovereign nation. And here we have a Russian dictator that's coming in and invading. So do you believe that there's so much more at stake here than just gas and energy, David?
I do believe there's more at stake here.
Dave,
I'm sorry. Yeah, I do believe that there's more at stake here. And I'll tell you what my greatest fear is. My greatest fear is that Putin uses tactical nuclear weapons to be able to achieve an advantage on the battlefield and to be able to force a negotiated settlement on terms that are favorable to Russia. I don't think, as I said, I don't think that he'll invade a NATO country. I don't think there's any chance of that at all. I don't think that he will use WMD on civilians, but I do think he could use tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield as a means to try to achieve an advantage and a favorable negotiated settlement. I hope that doesn't happen. Candidly, you also have to keep in mind that, as Sasha mentioned before, he talked about the Bucharest Agreement.
Budapest.
Bucharest, right?
Budapest.
Budapest.
Oh,
All right, all right. Budapest. That was not a treaty. There is a fundamental difference between an agreement and a treaty. An agreement is not binding, and we've seen that it was obviously not binding. It's also important to understand that we don't have a treaty with Taiwan, and in addition, unlike Ukraine, which is recognized as a sovereign nation by the United Nations and other global organizations, Taiwan is not. And believe me, China is looking at this very closely. And as I said in my latest book, I felt that it was only a matter of time before China would take Taiwan. And unfortunately, because of events that have occurred in the last year, not just Ukraine, but in other events that have taken place, I think it's likely to happen before I predicted in the latest book.
Dave, in one of my programs, I mentioned about Ukraine grow as a nation and becoming more responsible for its own actions. What's happened in 1994 that three liars really scooped from Ukraine all its nuclear arsenal, which was at the time the third largest in the world. So they played on an experience of Ukrainian leaders because they could, if it comes to wars, they could sell their arsenal. They could ask, give us at least $500, or let's see an auction. Who's going to give us more money? They just gave it because they so much believed in this agreement. So if the agreement is not enforceable, as you say, why in the world, except to trick Ukraine, why there was a need to sign and prepare such a obviously unenforceable, horrible document?
Well, because the Ukrainians probably didn't understand the difference, between a treaty and between an agreement, and took the words of the countries that were the signatories that they would end up keeping their word, irrespective of whether it was a treaty. We've got another one going on right now with the United States. We've got a negotiation going on right now with Iran. All right, and the Biden administration seems to be hell bent on trying to come to some type of an agreement with Iran. But it's
that's going to be brokered by Russia. Am I missing something?
I know. Let me finish this, but I can come back. But ironically, they're not likely to submit it to the Senate to be ratified as a treaty because it wouldn't be ratified as a treaty. So therefore, it's only as good as the current administration. It's not good beyond the current administration. The problem is that many people believe that it's so fundamentally flawed that it could have disastrous consequences before we get to a new administration.
Of course it would. And then, as I said, you've got Russia brokering this deal. I'm at a complete loss to understand the logic of this. And back to something that Sasha was saying about the sovereignty of Ukraine earlier, a little bit earlier. If Vladimir Putin, if he gets his wishes that he gets to annex the eastern parts of Ukraine, and he gets to, he gets an agreement from the Ukraine that they won't join NATO, that won't join Europe, that basically means he got what he wanted. He had no right to go in there in the first place. How on earth can we in the West stand by and just watch that happen and do nothing about it?
But what do you propose to do?
A little bit more than what we're doing.
Well, no, specifically, what do you propose to do?
Dave, if we're going to sit here and say, I don't understand the logic of some of the things that we say. Let's make sure Ukraine has got the money, the resources, and the military equipment that they need to be able to fight Russia. But we don't want to provide it to them directly, because if we do, we don't want to have a no-fly zone, because if we do, Russia might attack us. We're going to have to at some point take that risk. We're going to have to at some point, because otherwise, at what point are we prepared to take the risk? If he takes the Ukraine, are we prepared to take the risk if he goes into some more countries, or do we have to wait until he goes into a NATO country?
Let me remind you something.
This is unacceptable. This is not good enough. The Security Council, the other 4 members of the Security Council and the 10 non-permanent members jump up and say, no, we're not putting up this, and just go in and do it.
Let me ask you this. In 2016, the Russian warplane get probably by mistake into territory of Turkey for about 40 seconds. But that was enough for Turkey to take down this plane. The one pilot was killed and another one landed and so on. Did Russia say to Turkey, how dare you are, we're going to use nuclear attack against your son? No, they were very quiet. They apologized, and they said that they never, ever, Russian plane will cross the Turkish territory. Let me ask you this. Now Turkey closed the
Bosphorus Straits.
Yes, further than from it's away from Mediterranean Sea to Black Sea. They closed it. Did Russia say immediately reopen it because we have a huge warplanes sitting in the Mediterranean Sea? We need to bring them to the Black Sea. And if you're not going to do it, we are going to bomb you with thermonuclear bombs and so on. No, they didn't. It's still closed. They cannot use it. So how come Turkey, which is, by the way, a member of NATO, can oppose Russia on many instances, not just those two that I mentioned? And NATO and United States are you are all paralyzed by the threat of a madman that he is going to use nuclear arms. You're just paralyzed. Just give up. Just say, Putin, go in, take all the countries, take this, take that. You need Florida. Here is Florida. How come is it not
what could happen? Here's what
you can take Alaska back.
There's real concern about having a confrontation between the two biggest nuclear powers on Earth, Russia and the United States. But there is a way that you could get around this, okay? First, Article 5 says if a NATO country is attacked. In theory, you could have a non-nuclear member of NATO, for example, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia Republic, whatever. They could end up taking the planes that they want and ferry them to Ukraine. They would take a chance on getting shot down by the Russians, all right? But they could do that. That wouldn't be a direct nuclear confrontation. And arguably, it wouldn't be a violation of Article 5 because they would be entering into a war zone. The Russians would not be attacking the sovereign territory of NATO. So there is a way to get this done, all right? The other thing is you got to keep in mind, a lot of things that are being done with evacuation routes don't have anything to do with airplanes. They have to do, they have to do with artillery. They have to do with mines. They have to do with missiles that are fired from Russia. They have to do with hypersonics. And so, yes, there is a way to get MiGs in there to them. And I think we ought to be exploring to try to do that. But I don't think we want a direct confrontation between the United States and Russia.
Well, let's hear from Ben
Let me ask you a
Banerjee.
question,
If we
though.
could.
At what point would we be prepared? And it's not just the United States by itself; it's the members of the Five Eyes. It's all of the US allies. If you're not prepared to go in now, where they're attacking Ukraine, okay, you're not prepared to go in now. What does Russia need to do before we are prepared to go in?
Yeah.
Ben,
and this I
With
completely
troops.
agree to what Shakil is mentioning, or Shakil is talking about, is that when do we go in? When do we decide? That's what I exactly said, that after this, if Russia goes for Moldova, Finland, Sweden, NATO is still going to sit and wait. NATO has to go in. And what Sasha mentioned about the Turkey, that's a very good point. But 2016 is not 2022. In 2016, I was in Russia when this Turkish thing happened. The reason Russia did not react is because Turkey is far more important to them economically. Plus, it was trying to sell its S-400, which was much more important in also weakening NATO. So that's why they kept quiet. So, but that is not 2022. 2022 is a different story. Now Russia really, Turkey is much more now integrated to NATO at this moment. So this makes a difference. So I firmly believe NATO has to go in. And the question is, if Russia uses tactical nuke, and Russia doesn't have to use it from Russia. They are already putting it in Belarus. If they use it from Belarus, they can say Belarus fired these missiles. What is NATO going to? What kind of reply is NATO going to come with?
But also, just on a moral perspective, there, if whether it's founded or not, if Vladimir Putin says, "I want to go into another country, Ukraine in this instance, because I don't want that country to join NATO," is NATO supposed to stand by and say, well, until a nation who wants to join us is actually accepted, not that that was even on the cards at the time, but until a country is actually accepted by us, we'll allow that country to get attacked so that it doesn't get accepted into NATO? I mean, what sort of message does that send? This just shows so much weakness on our behalf here in the West. And I think all Western countries need to stand up, even those of us like Australia who aren't officially members of NATO for obvious reasons of our geography. We all need to stand up and say, no, we're not having this. We are not going to allow this to occur, and then try to make out that we're the great powers that and the great countries that everybody should try to emulate. Okay, this is such a bad example. If we're not prepared to fight for what we believe in,
yeah.
Well, a couple of things. One, keep in mind that NATO is a defensive alliance, rightly or wrongly. Okay, that's what it is. It's a fact. Okay. Secondly, also keep in mind that in order for a country to be admitted into NATO, there has to be agreement among all NATO nations for them to be admitted. And as Sasha has mentioned before, there are several NATO nations that would not want Ukraine to join. And I think that there are even more probably that are in that category now. All right. And so, look, I think if he uses WMD on a civilian population, or if he even uses WMD, including tactical nuclear from on a battlefield perspective, I think all bets are off. I think all bets are off. But in the absence of that, I don't see NATO doing anything more than providing as much economic and military assistance as they can.
David, I would like to mention one thing, that Ukraine is doing today a great job, not only for NATO, but for the whole world. They expose the weakness of Russian military system and Russia as their weakness as the overall country. And now the sanctions dispose the fertility of Russian financial and industrial system. It's so weak that now Western countries have to worry about that Russia will not collapse in the next few weeks, actually. All these well-known companies in the oil and gas complex like Halliburton, Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, they're all leaving Russia. So in about 2-3 months, there will be no way to maintain this oil rigs and all this infrastructure. So you don't even need embargo for Russian oil products and gas because they won't be able to deliver anything anymore without the financial and the most importantly the industrial technological assistance from the Western countries. So I wouldn't worry about that. So now today, no NATO power has ever demonstrated its ability to fight Russian army. Ukraine did. Ukraine can fight Russian army. NATO needs Ukraine today far more than Ukraine needs NATO, because Ukraine, provided that they would have necessary equipment, they could fight Russia one-on-one. Do you know any country in NATO that can fight Russia one-on-one?
But I still have to come back to that same point. If NATO is not prepared to go in now, but NATO's prepared to, because NATO's worried about provoking some sort of response or the start of World War III with Russia, how is that fear in any way negated if we simply provide military equipment to the Ukrainians? If the Ukrainians are successfully able to, with our assistance, financial and weaponry, with our assistance, fight off Russia, is Russia going to go, okay, fine, look, you beat us? Or are they going to keep attacking and they're just going to escalate and escalate? So we can sit there and play lip service to it and say, we're going to send billions of dollars over and billions of dollars worth of equipment over. But ultimately, if we're not prepared to go in, what's going to happen? Either Ukraine wins or we go in. And Russia, if we're scared of provoking them.
I think there are other scenarios, and I told you what the other scenario is. The other scenario is an armistice.
Yeah.
Well, that's
where Russia maintains control over certain occupied territory without an agreement from Ukraine to cede that territory, and where you have a stalemate. I think that is, maybe the most likely outcome from this.
But that still would be, in my opinion, that would still be a show of weakness from the West.
I totally agree. I agree with you.
I agree with you, Dave. I'm just saying.
I agree with you.
I just wanted to tell a couple things here. First of all, Russia will not have a stalemate, because Russia already lost, actually, not depending on the further things which will happen in Ukraine. Yeah, during the first month they didn't manage to achieve any of their strategic goals which they planned to achieve in Ukraine, and in half a year Russian economy will collapse. Yeah, so Russia already lost, and currently most of their intents are focused on claiming as much territories as possible, except of large cities, because they can't capture them. Yeah, in order to have better negotiation positions in Istanbul during these upcoming 2 days. Yeah, because they try to claim some villages. Yeah, in order to trade villages, not to trade big cities. Yeah, they can't capture big cities, except of Kherson and Taos. But actually, it was a very
And with that, we're at the hours. Ivan, we're going to have to go, but thank you for beaming in from Ukraine. Yeah. Hopefully, we'll be able to see you next week here on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. And until then, stay safe around the world. We'll see you all next week. Take care.